Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is January 15th, 2026.
And, this date, it really feels like a pivotal moment. We are watching the visible, systematic collapse of core institutional checks.
It's happening both at home and globally.
Exactly, and it's being driven by the weaponized use of state power. I mean, the news today is defined by this absolute confluence of two crises that seem separate but are, they're deeply connected.
On one hand, you have an unprecedented internal revolt inside the Department of Justice, which is following these lethal federal incidents up in Minneapolis.
And at the exact same time, we're looking at a near-miss military confrontation with Iran that just happened in the last 48 hours.
The common thread, as you laid out, is the explicit use of the state apparatus, whether that's federal law enforcement or, strategic bombers.
It's all being used to achieve political ends.
So our mission in this deep dive is clear. We're taking the raw source material from the Minneapolis ICE shooting fallout and the very complex U.S.-Iran escalation.
And we are prioritizing the names, the dates, the hard data.
We want to synthesize the hidden truth here about the administration's strategy and really the true costs to our democratic institutions. We're giving you the context other channels are missing.
Exactly. Let's start on the home front then. Let's go to Minneapolis, where this crisis, it isn't just a local tragedy, it's a dramatic institutional meltdown triggered by a federal agent using deadly force against a civilian.
The incident that ignited this whole firestorm was the shooting of Renee Good. Now, what we know from initial reports is that she was an unarmed mother of three, described as disabled.
And crucially, she was reportedly trying to drive away from the situation when IC agent Jonathan Ross opened fire.
And what followed was just an immediate, high-level political intervention.
Oh, almost instantly. The political intervention was designed to shape the reality on the ground before anyone else could. We saw the president take to Truth Social, and he immediately established the official spin.
What was that spin?
He claimed Good was a professional agitator. He alleged that Agent Ross was, and I'm quoting here, violently, willfully, and viciously ran over.
So right away, he's setting up the justification.
Right. The president stated that Ross was acting in self-defense and was recovering in the hospital. It justifies the shooting before any investigation has even begun. The speed of that, the certainty of that narrative, that is the first sign of institutional interference.
And this is where the source material, the specific details, they start to just dismantle that official story. Civil liberties attorney Janine Eunice provided a devastating critique of the self-defense claim.
She did. And she emphasizes that the legal standard for using deadly force, a reasonable fear of death or serious physical injury, it's severely challenged by the physical facts here.
Because the car was moving away, right?
Exactly. If the car was moving away when Agent Ross fired, it fundamentally undermines any claim of imminent danger. It's very hard to argue you're in fear for your life from something that's leaving.
And Eunice brought up another detail, a really critical one, about Agent Ross's conduct right after the shooting.
Yeah, this is important. Sources reported that Agent Ross allegedly used a crude expletive, F&B, right after he fired. Now, in a legal setting, that isn't just inflammatory language.
It's evidence.
It becomes evidence of his state of mind. A prosecutor could argue that using a term like that in that moment suggests he acted out of anger or maybe frustration, but not out of a calculated, justified fear for his life.
So it shifts the motive.
It shifts the motive from defensive to potentially retaliatory, and that could completely destroy a self-defense justification in court. A jury is trained to evaluate intent, and that kind of raw emotion is a dangerous indicator for the defense.
This incident, it just metastasized so quickly, went from the street level straight into the career ranks of the Department of Justice. And we have to highlight how truly unusual this internal revolt was.
Mass resignations. 6 federal prosecutors in the Minneapolis U.S. Attorney's Office walked out. This is not normal workplace friction. Not at all. As veteran legal analysts, including Jeffrey Toobin, pointed out, these resignations are, quote, incredibly unusual.
What do they indicate?
Extreme politicization under Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Deputy AG Todd Blanche. Toobin framed this as career professionals, quote, voting with their feet. They simply could not reconcile their professional obligations with the political demands being placed on them.
When 6 people walk out of the federal office that fast, it's a signal.
It signals a fundamental break. A line has been crossed.
So let's focus on the key individual here, because his resignation is arguably the most damaging for the administration in Minnesota. Joseph Thompson. He was second in command at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And he was overseeing the massive, politically charged Somali fraud investigation.
Which was a huge case for Republicans, right?
The political goldmine. The Somali fraud case involved millions in misappropriated federal funds. It was frequently cited to justify a ramped-up federal law enforcement presence, especially ICE, in Minnesota.
So Thompson, by resigning, was walking away from a politically successful, career-defining case that he was spearheading.
That tells you everything, doesn't it? It shows just how severe the internal conflict must have been. He gave up his signature case.
The New York Times reported his specific reason for the outrage, and it goes right to the core of institutional integrity. He strenuously objected to senior DOJ officials in Washington.
Specifically, he objected to them overriding the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA.
Which normally handles these kinds of cases.
The BCA handles reviews of police shootings in Minnesota. It's the state's own mechanism for local accountability. But the DOJ not only refused to cooperate with them.
He effectively iced out the state-level investigation.
Iced them out, and then they demanded that Thompson's office launch a criminal investigation into the victim's widow, Becca Good.
Wait, let's just pause on that because the implication is just chilling. The political leadership protected the federal agent, Jonathan Ross, while actively pursuing the grieving family of the victim. They were trying to retroactively vilify this dead woman and her widow, branding Renee Good a domestic terrorist in official filings.
That's the systemic strategy at play. And it's not just our analysis. Mayor Jacob Frey and Minnesota's Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, they confirmed the reality on the ground. They stated publicly that the FBI, which they described as an appendage of Trump and Bondi, completely iced out the BCA. This meant state officials were prohibited from accessing the critical evidence needed to conduct their own impartial investigation.
And the legal mechanism for this obstruction is crucial for you, the listener, to understand. Janine Eunice explained it. Because Ross is a federal officer, he has the right to have any potential state charges removed to federal court.
And more critically, the feds hold all the evidence.
All of it.
Forensic reports, internal communications, official witness statements. So even with those cell phone recordings that were circulating everywhere, Eunice noted that the feds' control over the complete evidentiary package makes any state-level prosecution highly unlikely to succeed. It just destroys local accountability.
This is the danger, isn't it? The federal government is effectively claiming absolute jurisdiction over its agents, even when those agents might have committed crimes against state residents.
It ensures that accountability only happens on their terms, which in this administration means no accountability at all. And, well, the situation didn't stabilize. It escalated.
It did. As the fallout from the Good shooting peaked just yesterday, January 14th, a second incident occurred, another one involving federal agents and deadly force, and it just fueled the local rage.
And again, we saw immediate conflicting narratives.
So DHS put out a statement, an extremely detailed one, about a targeted traffic stop of an immigrant from Venezuela.
Yes, they claimed the subject fled, crashed his car, and then violently assaulted an officer. Their story then escalated dramatically. They claimed 2 other subjects ambushed the officer using makeshift weapons, a snow shovel and a broom handle.
So that forced the officer to fire a, quote, defensive shot,
hitting the original subject in the leg. You see how that narrative is constructed, right? It's designed to fit the most severe justification standard possible. It paints a picture of a lone officer under siege.
But counter evidence emerged from the scene almost immediately.
Witness accounts, recordings taken inside a nearby apartment where the injured man fled, they suggested a radically different timeline.
Witnesses said the man was shot in the leg, but possibly inside the apartment.
Which completely contradicts the whole ambush narrative. The recordings, you can hear the panic, families calling 911, terrified for their small children, literally begging local police to come and help them.
The difference between those 2 stories is the legal difference between self-defense and unjustified assault.
Was the officer ambushed by multiple people with tools? Or did he pursue and shoot a fleeing, wounded man who sought refuge in a home? The DHS story tries to impose a narrative of domestic terror, and the witness accounts paint a picture of aggressive, unchecked federal force entering a private residence.
And this rapid succession of lethal incidents, it has to be viewed in the wider context of this expanding federal police state in Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz reported on the scale of it.
And the scale is aggressive and disproportionate. Estimates range between 2,000 and 3,000 armed, masked, and reportedly undertrained ICE agents deployed across the state.
And the tactics they're using, that's what really defines the level of this domestic aggression.
Governor Walz provided specific examples. He talked about ICE agents going door to door, explicitly asking Americans to snitch on the nationality of their non-white neighbors.
That is the textbook definition of unconstitutional racial profiling. It's intimidation.
It's turning citizens against each other based on appearance.
And then there's the use of chemical agents, which is just horrifying.
Yeah.
An incident at Roosevelt High School, confirmed by multiple sources. They used tear gas and flashbangs.
It forced the school to close, and a father, Sean Jackson, he gave this devastating account of tear gas being deployed into his car.
And it led to the hospitalization of 6 children.
6 children, including a 6-month-old infant. That single fact. A 6-month-old infant hit by tear gas. That fundamentally changes how you have to view this deployment.
We are not talking about maintaining order anymore.
No, we're talking about indiscriminate domestic aggression aimed at punishing dissent. And this brings us back to the legal rhetoric trying to cover all this up. You have figures like J.D. Vance pushing the concept of absolute immunity for these agents.
But as we discussed, the legal reality just refutes that entirely. There is no doctrine of absolute immunity that lets law enforcement operate without any constraints.
And we have to remember the September 2025 Supreme Court opinion. It was a concurring opinion written by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, of all people.
And what did it say?
It reiterated that immigration agents must have reasonable suspicion to stop and question individuals. This legal grounding makes it clear that these aggressive papers, please tactics we're seeing are likely exceeding established legal and constitutional boundaries.
And this disregard for legal limits for local authority, it all culminated in the highest level threat you can make.
The invocation of the Insurrection Act.
Exactly. The apex of this domestic conflict arrived when the president posted on Truth Social. He threatened that if the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists, he would invoke the act.
Meaning he would deploy active duty U.S. military to crush the protests.
Governor Walz immediately called that move tyrannical, and it is an incredibly dangerous one.
It is. I mean, you have to look at the history of the Insurrection Act. Past deployments were generally welcomed or at least requested by local authorities. Think of Eisenhower using it during the Civil Rights Movement to escort the Little Rock Nine.
Or the LA riots, where the local government asked for federal help.
Right. But in this scenario, the deployment would be against the explicit, heated objections of the local governor and the mayor.
So using the military against citizens, against the will of the state government. That transforms the U.S. military into a purely political weapon.
It's aimed at extinguishing domestic dissent. It is an act of force designed to consolidate executive power by removing all institutional opposition.
The fact that the administration is so willing to use the machinery of the state, from ICE to the DOJ to the military, to crush opposition at home.
Yeah.
It makes their strategy overseas all the more alarming.
That's the perfect transition. We're seeing a mirrored, weaponized use of state power, but on the global stage, and the target is Iran.
Let's pivot now to the brinksmanship of the last 48 hours and the explicit move toward regime change, using a predictable, documented playbook.
We can define the administration's strategy against Iran by looking at the work of political scientists. Professor John Mearsheimer laid out a 4-part strategy for regime change. A playbook also heavily cited by geopolitical analysts like Aaron Maté, and it seems the U.S. and Israel have followed it almost precisely in the run-up to this crisis.
What's so fascinating is the sequencing. It seems deliberate, highly coordinated.
Oh, very. It starts by setting the stage for domestic upheaval, then providing the tools for the West to intervene, and then finally justifying the kinetic action.
Okay, so let's start with phase 1, economic warfare. What does that look like in the Iranian context?
Phase 1 is about maximizing pain. It's creating desperation. It means imposing sanctions that are designed specifically to wreck the economy and turn the population against the regime.
And the data shows it works.
The data proves it. Maximum pressure sanctions caused Iranian food prices to rise an astonishing 72% in just 1 year.
72%.
72. And this isn't just about limiting their oil revenue. It's about making bread, meat, and rice unaffordable for the average person. Mearsheimer stresses that when Iranians protest, they're protesting the terrible economic conditions.
Conditions manufactured by the United States.
Fundamentally, yes. They're protesting starvation, not primarily ideology.
And that economic desperation, that widespread suffering, it sets the ideal stage for Phase 2, fueling protests.
Which is exactly what we saw in the mass protests that surged in late December of 2025. And the involvement of external actors became strikingly clear.
The Jerusalem Post reported on December 29th that Mossad was deeply involved in fomenting these protests.
But the most staggering piece of hard data confirming explicit U.S. involvement is the communication infrastructure. The U.S. provided 40,000 Starlink terminals to the protesters.
40,000.
40,000. I mean, that is an enormous operational commitment. It far exceeds previous communication aid efforts, and it signals a clear intent to support a widespread, nationally coordinated uprising.
Which brings us to Phase 3. Propaganda and disinformation. This is essential to justify a military intervention, isn't it?
It's essential. The goal is twofold. First, convince the Western audience that the protests are organic, they're noble, giving a moral justification for military action.
And second,
you use the momentum of the protests and information warfare to signal internally to Iranians that the regime is finished. You create a sense of inevitability.
and this is where we have to critically analyze the sources driving the narrative.
We absolutely do. CBS News, for example, reported death tolls ranging between 12,000 and 20,000. They cited activist groups as their source.
But when you dig into those groups,
You find that these groups, specifically human rights activists in Iran, are overwhelmingly funded by the U.S. government. And they're based conveniently in Fairfax, Virginia.
so while the deaths are tragic, the sheer magnitude of those figures, they're being pumped out without any credible independent methodology.
Precisely. The goal is to generate the political momentum needed for the final phase.
Which is phase 4, kinetic action.
This is the moment the U.S. or the Israeli military comes in with overwhelming air power, with missiles, to deliver the coup de grace. You finish off the regime cheaply, without needing American boots on the ground.
But this is where the playbook failed.
Fundamentally failed. Mearsheimer and others confirmed the protests fizzled out because of the government crackdown. But the single greatest technological shock was the Starlink failure.
Tell us more about the Starlink shock. I mean, the U.S. supplied 40,000 terminals. That's enough to create a massive parallel communication network. How could the regime possibly defeat that?
Well, analysts like Alistair Crick and Alexander Mersheimer really focused on this technical failure. Despite the vast number of terminals, the Iranian regime successfully jammed and severely degraded Starlink coverage across the country.
Wow.
Mercouris's deduction here is crucial. To achieve that level of degradation, you don't just need to buy jamming equipment. You likely need sophisticated technological assistance and dedicated personnel on the ground.
So this points to outside help.
It points strongly to Russian or Chinese technological assistance. And that represents a major commitment to Iran that immediately caused, quote, extraordinary dismay and shock in Washington and Tel Aviv.
So that jamming operation is a geopolitical game changer. It fundamentally broke phase 2 of the U.S.-Israeli plan.
It removed the critical communication and propaganda infrastructure that the protests relied on to coordinate and maintain momentum. And that failure directly led to the brinksmanship we saw on January 14th and 15th.
Reports from Reuters and Israeli officials confirmed a strike was imminent. Iran responded defensively. They closed their airspace, launched their Air Force assets to preserve them. The world was holding its breath.
And then we saw a truly abrupt de-escalation. President Trump announced he received information that the killing of protesters was stopping. He canceled meetings with Iranian officials and used this as the explicit pretext for pausing the strike.
So let's analyze that off-ramp. Was this genuine diplomacy, or was it a strategic retreat forced by outside powers?
Mercouris suggests it was the latter. This abrupt shift, where Iranian judicial authorities heatedly denied any plans for rapid executions of protesters, that was almost certainly due to very strong, immediate advice from Moscow.
The Russians advised Iran to eliminate the single justification Trump had just publicly given for an intervention.
Precisely. By halting the executions, Iran effectively denied Trump the moral and political cover he needed to launch a kinetic strike without appearing completely unprovoked.
Trump had said, "I've canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way."
And by removing that public justification, Iran made an attack much harder for the administration to sell internationally, especially after the Starlink failure showed they didn't have control of the internal situation.
And this highlights the shift in objective, which is the key risk factor for you, the listener, to understand. The goal is no longer about containing the nuclear program.
That used to be the publicly stated purpose, right?
Now it is explicitly the toppling of the Tehran regime. The Financial Times confirmed this. They called it the unfinished business from the June 2025 conflict.
And Mearsheimer offers a warning that goes even deeper than just regime change. He suggests the U.S. and Israel are interested in more than just installing a puppet government.
What more could they want?
They want to break Iran apart into its constituent weaker parts, tribal, ethnic, regional, echoing what happened to Syria. They want to wreck Iran permanently, ensuring it can never again be a powerful regional bulwark.
That sounds less like foreign policy and more like geostructural vandalism. The stakes are existential for regional stability. So let's move to the immediate geopolitical implications of this incredibly tense pause. What are the next steps?
Well, despite the pause announced by the president, the military preparations are continuing unabated. The Wall Street Journal reports the administration is actively considering attacks using Tomahawk cruise missiles.
And strategic bombers.
And strategic bombers, yes. B-2s, B-1s, even older B-52s launched from the continental United States.
The choice of assets there is revealing, isn't it?
It is. Using B-2s, stealth bombers, and Tomahawks. That signals an intent to hit deep, high-value, hardened targets that are heavily defended. This is far more than a limited punitive strike.
And launching from the continental U.S. gives them political and operational flexibility.
It does. They can strike without immediately risking regional assets, at least initially. And the hardware is moving into position. Alexander Mercouris confirmed the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group is being redeployed
From the South China Sea.
directly to the Persian Gulf. This is a clear, unmistakable signal of intent. It gives the administration a massive mobile platform for kinetic action. But we have to note the timeline.
It's estimated to take a week to 10 days for the carrier group to get on station.
Right, and that window gives diplomacy or perhaps more brinksmanship some time to unfold.
But the retaliation risk this time around is exponentially higher than it was in June of 2025.
Oh, absolutely. Iran has made its intent explicitly clear. They will retaliate against both Israel and American bases in the region. This changes the calculus entirely. Any military action triggers a regional war, not just a surgical strike.
And that potential conflict immediately triggered severe strategic concerns from U.S. allies in the region.
And we have to focus on the financial choke point that motivated their urgent advice, the potential closure of the Straits of Hormuz.
That strait is the absolute economic lifeline for the region.
The Gulf states ship, and this is a quote, far and away the greater part of their oil through the Straits of Hormuz. An Iranian threat to close it, even for a day, would cause devastating global economic impact.
And internal instability in those neighboring Arab countries.
Absolutely. This fear is why Arab allies countries, who often tacitly support pressure on Iran, urgently advise the administration to call off the strike. They fear economic chaos more than they fear a contained Iran.
This brings us back to the diplomatic landscape, specifically this Moscow shadow that's hanging over the sudden pause.
The Washington Post reported that Russia secretly mediated assurances between Israel and Iran that neither party would preemptively attack the other.
That mediation is critical.
It signals Russia's deepening commitment to stability on its southern flank and its clear influence on Tehran's decision-making. Russia is asserting itself as the indispensable regional security manager, coordinating with both Israel and Iran to prevent a major war.
And this Russian mediation coincides with a massive geopolitical shift among the Gulf states themselves.
Yes. Countries like Saudi Arabia, who Mercouris notes were previously advocates for a strike, are now openly opposing military action.
Why the sudden shift?
They're weighing the costs and benefits. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states now increasingly view Iran as a crucial bulwark that balances Israel's power in the region rather than just a threat.
So the destruction of Iran would create a power vacuum.
A power vacuum that would overwhelmingly benefit Israel, making it the undisputed, hyper-dominant regional military force. And the Gulf states do not want that level of Israeli dominance.
On the economic front, Iran also seems to have a significant financial safety net in place.
It does. China, as Iran's largest trading partner, has provided assurances that if Iran needed financial assistance to stabilize its currency, the rial funds could be provided very quickly via BRICS institutions.
But analysts noted that Iranian officials failed to use this option during the recent currency crisis.
That's right. Alistair Crook and Mercouris both noted that. It suggests that while the external economic defenses are strong, internal governance and competence remain a serious weakness.
Finally, let's look at the external leadership targeting the regime. Reza Pahlavi, the U.S.-based son of the deposed Shah.
He's been actively meeting with key American figures, people like Witkoff and Senator Lindsey Graham. He's clearly positioning himself as the leader of a potential transitional government, and he's receiving explicit U.S. backing.
But we have to balance that support with some critical analysis, like the kind provided by Patrick Bet-David.
Yes, and Bet-David, while personally sympathetic to the Shah's era, offered a sharp critique of Pahlavi's moral authority. He argued it's, quote, irresponsible for someone living a very cushy lifestyle in the U.S. to sit abroad and call on protesters to risk death on the streets back home.
That critique cuts deep into the legitimacy of any externally imposed leader.
It does. Bet-David also highlighted the problem of Pahlavi supporters, describing a cult-like following that aggressively attacks and fights against any internal criticism.
So it raises the fundamental question. Even if he were installed, could he lead a successful democratic transition?
Or would he just become another foreign-imposed figurehead who fails to build broad, legitimate support? The failure of the protests suggests that change has to come from within, not from a Washington-backed opposition movement.
The global stage reveals this complex web of pressure and strategic intervention. Now, let's return to the domestic situation one final time to synthesize the ultimate common thread, the systematic weaponization of the machinery of state power.
The internal revolt at the DOJ in Minneapolis is not an isolated incident. It's one part of a comprehensive strategy aimed at removing institutional checks. And we see this strategy mirrored in a far more high-profile and, frankly, astonishing target: Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell.
Who was a Trump appointee himself.
A Trump appointee. And the development is astonishing. The DOJ is investigating Powell based on seemingly trivial issues. It's related to congressional testimony about the physical structure and renovations of the Fed building.
So this isn't a complex fraud case or market manipulation. It's about paperwork and building details.
Exactly. And Jeffrey Toobin analyzed this action for what it is: a transparent attempt to intimidate him.
Why?
Because Powell is behaving consistently with the Fed's required political independence, which the administration finds inconvenient. The Fed's independence ensures monetary policy is based on economic data, not election cycles. The administration is clearly seeking a scapegoat.
And this blatant political abuse has triggered a severe defense mechanism in Congress.
Yes, Republicans Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski have announced they will block all future Federal Reserve nominees until this investigation is dismissed.
This isn't just political squabbling.
No, this is a dramatic, bipartisan defense of the vital importance of the Fed's political insulation. It shows that career professionals and institutionalists, even within the president's party, are drawing hard lines.
And if we look at the wider institutional damage across the DOJ under Pam Bondi, the picture is one of complete ideological transformation.
Toobin's analysis confirms that the Civil Rights Division has fundamentally shifted its focus.
How significant is that shift?
It's historically devastating. The Civil Rights Division was created to enforce anti-discrimination laws. Under Bondi, it's focused almost entirely on defending white rights against perceived reverse discrimination.
Citing issues in college admissions or federal contracting.
Right. It essentially inverts the division's historic mission. And we've seen the near disappearance of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act prosecutions cases that target U.S. corporations engaging in bribery abroad, halting those signals institutional impunity for corporate fraud.
So the DOJ is no longer functioning as an impartial arbiter of federal law.
It's functioning as the legal arm of political consolidation.
And the violation of established norms, it extends even to the separation of press and state. Another example from Toobin's analysis is the FBI executing a search warrant on a Washington Post reporter's home.
That is a profound violation of decades-long Justice Department tradition protecting journalistic inquiry. For the FBI to pursue a search warrant against a major news outlet reporter sends a clear message.
The message is that any institution, The Federal Reserve, the independent media, career prosecutors in Minneapolis that tries to maintain neutrality or hold the executive branch accountable is now considered an enemy.
An enemy to be targeted and dismantled.
And this erosion of norms extends into the judicial system, providing a structural backdoor for politicizing our electoral infrastructure. We just saw the Supreme Court's blockbuster 7-2 ruling in the Illinois case.
This ruling is a legal earthquake. It grants candidates standing to challenge election laws without having to prove concrete traditional injury. Before, you had to show actual harm. Now, just being a candidate is enough to challenge the rules.
Mark Elias, a highly respected election law expert, analyzed this. The court says it aims to shift litigation to before an election, which sounds good.
It sounds good on paper, but Elias argues the ruling is based on an assumption of good faith, which is, well, it's dangerously absent in the current political climate.
So the fear Elias articulates is what?
It's that the ruling opens the floodgates to a tidal wave of litigation. Opposing parties, primarily Republicans, will use this new low bar for standing to constantly challenge, sue, and harass election administrators. The goal isn't just vote suppression.
It's the deliberate erosion of public confidence in the integrity of the results through endless legal chaos.
A strategy of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks in the courts. The pattern is just undeniable.
From targeting the Fed's independence to undermining election integrity and weaponizing federal agents against domestic dissent in Minneapolis, the DOJ's actions reveal a comprehensive, systemic strategy of using the literal machinery of government to eliminate political opposition and consolidate power.
It is the exact same use of weaponized state power we just saw deployed in the regime change playbook against Iran. This is the common thread tying everything together. What stands out is the sheer scope of it all. It's hitting institutions simultaneously, at home and abroad, with a singular goal: remove any and all opposition. The buffer is gone.
Today's date, January 15th, 2026. It marks the end of an institutional buffer period. We have moved from subtle political pressure to overt, weaponized legal and military action. This has forced career professionals, from 6 federal prosecutors resigning to Republicans blocking Fed nominees, to vote with their feet.
And it has dramatically altered international calculations, as we saw with Russia's technological intervention in Iran.
The one essential truth for you, the listener, this week is this. The current administration's defining strategy is the use of state power to eliminate institutional checks.
Whether it's the independence of the Federal Reserve, the neutral enforcement norms of the DOJ, or foreign regimes resisting U.S. and Israeli regional dominance, everything is political, and every tool of the state is now a weapon aimed at opposition.
And this raises an important question for you to mull over. If the protests failed to achieve regime change in Iran because Moscow intervened by successfully jamming 40,000 Starlink terminals, what unforeseen technological or diplomatic response will be required to stabilize the U.S. domestic system against a government willing to turn federal law enforcement against its own citizens?
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again. Goodbye.